In December 2010, a U.S. federal agent was shot dead in the Arizona desert. What seemed like just another crime at the border quickly became one of the biggest security scandals in the history of the United States and Mexico. This is the origin of Operation Fast and Furious, a story the government never wanted you to know. On the night of December 14, 2010, the Arizona desert witnessed a deadly confrontation. Agents from the BORTAC tactical group, an elite unit of the Border Patrol, were attempting to intercept an armed group that ambushed undocumented immigrants to steal their money and drugs. In the shootout, Brian Terry, a 40-year-old agent, was fatally wounded in the abdomen. He died shortly afterward before receiving medical assistance. At the scene, 4 Kalashnikov-type rifles were recovered. 2 of them were directly linked to a covert operation of the U.S. government, Operation Fast and Furious. This wasn't just a tragedy, it was the beginning of a political, diplomatic, and media earthquake, because those weapons had been deliberately allowed to cross the border and fall into the hands of organized crime. To understand how this happened, we have to go back to 2006, when Felipe Calderón had just assumed the presidency of Mexico. In a dramatic move, Calderón declared war on drug trafficking. He deployed the armed forces and federal police to the streets, promising to defeat the drug cartels. But the result was quite the opposite. Violence skyrocketed. Homicides rose to unprecedented levels. Cities like Ciudad Juárez, Tijuana, Culiacán, and Nuevo Laredo turned into war zones. And while Mexico was fighting with the cartels, the U.S. held the source of their firepower, the guns. According to official reports, up to 90% of the weapons seized in Mexico came from the United States. Assault rifles, automatic weapons, pistols, high-capacity magazines. Everything could be easily purchased at gun shops in the southern U.S. Cartels didn't need to send their own hitmen to buy weapons, which would have been risky and easily detectable. Instead, they used a system known as straw purchasers, fake buyers. These were U.S. citizens with no criminal records. Many were young people in debt, addicts, or people in desperate need of money. In exchange for a few bucks, they legally bought guns under their own name, but on behalf of the traffickers. On paper, it all looked like a legitimate sale, but in reality, it was a sophisticated arms trafficking network disguised as regular commerce. These weapons were then hidden in vehicles and crossed the border into Mexico every single day. The situation became so alarming that the ATF, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, decided to take action. Between 2004 and 2005, the ATF launched the Gun Runner program. The goal was to track weapons purchased in the U.S. that ended up in Mexico. It sounded like a logical plan. Identify suspicious buyers, trace the weapons, dismantle networks, and arrest those responsible. But there was one big problem: the method. The ATF used a tactic called gun walking, letting the guns walk. Instead of intercepting buyers and seizing the weapons immediately, they decided to let them go through, hoping to trace them all the way to cartel leaders. A risky move that ended in tragedy. Before Fast and Furious, there were earlier experiments. Operation White Receiver, 2006 to 2007. 474 guns were allowed to cross into Mexico. Only 64 were recovered. The Hernandez case, 2007, and Medrano case, 2008. The traffickers were identified but not arrested. They were allowed to continue operating in order to gather more intelligence. When they were finally apprehended, the damage was done. Dozens, maybe hundreds of weapons were already in the hands of hitmen. These operations failed to dismantle networks. On the contrary, they empowered the cartels. In the fall of 2009, a new operation was launched. It all began when Andre Howard, owner of the Lone Wolf gun shop in Phoenix, contacted the ATF concerned. A young man named Jacob Chambers had bought 19 AK-47 rifles in cash in a single day. Shortly after, another buyer, Uriel Patino, purchased 6 more rifles, also in cash. The ATF, under the command of Phoenix Group 7, quickly deduced they were dealing with a weapons trafficking network with ties to Mexico. But instead of arresting the buyers, they ordered the gun store owner to keep selling them weapons. The objective? Track the guns all the way to the big bosses. The ATF's plan combined several tactics: direct surveillance of buyers and their vehicles, phone taps to infiltrate their communications, use of the E-Trace system, which allows tracing weapons by serial number, but only after they've been seized or found at crime scenes. Use of GPS tracking devices was mentioned for real-time tracking, but they didn't work well. The batteries lasted only days and signals were often lost. There's no official record confirming widespread use. In the following months, Chambers bought over 70 weapons. Patino spent more than $86,000 on firearms. More buyers joined: Jaime Avila, Joshua Moore, Sean Stewart. Stewart alone purchased 200 guns worth $140,000. The ATF identified the network's leader, Manuel Celis Acosta. They also found a safe house and an auto shop that inspired the name of the operation, Fast and Furious. Meanwhile, in Mexico, authorities seized weapons in a Sonora. After checking the serial numbers, 19 of them had been purchased by Patino just weeks earlier. The evidence was overwhelming, but instead of shutting down the operation, Phoenix Group 7 decided to keep going. Gun store owners began expressing concerns. One of them wrote to the ATF, "I guess you're looking for a little reassurance that these guns aren't going south or ending up in the wrong hands." The response was always the same: keep selling, everything is under control. But it wasn't. The weapons started showing up in crimes in Tijuana, Ciudad Juarez, Culiacán, Acapulco, Nogales, Cuernavaca, Mexicali, and more. Despite the warning signs, the ATF did not stop the plan. The operation kept moving forward. The network of straw purchasers kept growing. The weapons piled up and crossed the border every single day. But on December 14th, 2010, one of those weapons took the life of a U.S. federal agent. And that was the breaking point. What the government tried to keep hidden was leaked, and the truth came out. On the night of December 14th, 2010, an elite Border Patrol unit, BORTAC, carried out an operation in Rio Rico, Arizona, about 18 kilometers from the Mexican border. Their mission was to intercept a group of assailants who ambushed undocumented immigrants to rob them of drugs and money. During the mission, a shootout broke out. Agent Brian Terry, 40 years old, was struck by a bullet and died minutes later. At the scene, 4 AK-47 rifles were recovered. 2 of them had been purchased by Jaime Avila, one of the straw purchasers involved in Operation Fast and Furious. Weapons from a covert operation by the US government used to kill one of its own agents. It was the darkest irony and the beginning of the collapse. Initially, the ATF tried to handle the case discreetly, seeking to prevent the connection between the operation's guns and Terry's death from coming to light. But inside the agency, many agents were furious. They had warned this could happen. One of them, Special Agent John Dodson, decided to break the silence. Dodson had worked directly on Operation Fast and Furious. In an exclusive interview with CBS News, he revealed that the ATF deliberately allowed weapons to cross into Mexico, ignored multiple internal warnings, had no realistic plan to track the guns once they crossed the border. Dodson stated, "We all knew these guns were going to end up being used in crimes. We knew this was going to happen, but we were told to keep going." The story exploded in the media. The revelations triggered a political storm in Washington. The media uncovered that more than 2,500 weapons were sold through the operation. Over 100 were still missing. Several had been used in murders in Mexico. The weapons included high-powered models such as AK-47 WASR-10, AR-15 Bushmaster .223, FN-57, known as the Cop Killer for its ability to pierce bulletproof vests, Barrett .50 BMG rifles capable of downing helicopters or piercing armored vehicles. The case was no longer an internal ATF issue. The US Congress demanded answers. The scandal reached the top of power. Then Attorney General Eric Holder, head of the Department of Justice, under which the ATF operated, was called to testify before Congress. His answer was clear. "I had no knowledge of this operation until it was reported by the media." But internal emails said otherwise. Documents revealed that Holder had been informed about the operation as early as mid-2010. Congress requested full access to all reports and emails. The Department of Justice refused to hand them over, claiming the content was classified information that compromised national security. Then President Barack Obama spoke publicly. "I did not authorize that program. We didn't know. And I'm just as angry as you are." But the matter didn't end there. To protect his Attorney General, Obama invoked executive privilege, a legal power that allowed him to block the release of more than 7,000 documents related to the operation. This move generated even more controversy. In June 2012, the House of Representatives voted to hold Eric Holder in criminal contempt, making him the first Attorney General in U.S. history to receive such a sanction. While Washington debated who knew what, In Mexico, the weapons kept showing up at crime scenes. According to reports from the U.S. Congress, firearms from Operation Fast and Furious were found in over 150 crime scenes across the country, including Sonora, Sinaloa, Chihuahua, Tamaulipas, Durango, Jalisco, Michoacán, Coahuila. These weapons ended up in the hands of all the major cartels: Sinaloa, Los Zetas, Gulf Cartel, La Familia Michoacana, Milenio Cartel, CJNG, Jalisco New Generation Cartel. The impact wasn't just numbers, it was human tragedy. Several municipal police officers in Tijuana were killed with FN-57 pistols linked to the operation. In 2011, U.S. agent Jaime Zapata was murdered in San Luis Potosí, also with weapons connected to it. In 2016, after the capture of El Chapo Guzman, a .50 Barrett rifle found in his hideout was traced back to Operation Fast and Furious. Meanwhile, the Mexican government denied everything. President Felipe Calderón and his Attorney General Eduardo Medina Mora claimed they were never informed about the operation. Calderón even called it a violation of national sovereignty. But again, the documents told another story. According to U.S. Congress reports, Carlos Fernando Luque Ordóñez, representative of the Attorney General's Office, PGR, worked directly at the ATF offices in Phoenix during the operation. When this became public, he disappeared from the map. The Mexican government denied any involvement. Years later, under the administration of Andrés Manuel López Obrador, AMLO, the issue resurfaced. The president described the case as an illegal intervention that violated Mexico's sovereignty. His government demanded from the United States a formal explanation, the delivery of documents, and the names of those responsible. Mexico's foreign ministry sent a diplomatic note to Washington. To this day, no clear or decisive response has been given. The operation failed, the scandal erupted, the guns crossed, the blood flowed, but who was punished? Who paid for all of this? No one. What was supposed to be a covert mission to save lives became a silent policy that multiplied death. In 2012, 2 years after Agent Brian Terry's murder and countless hearings, the U.S. Department of Justice released the official report on Operation Fast and Furious. Its conclusions were devastating. It admitted serious errors in planning, oversight, and execution. It pointed to a lack of coordination, poor decisions, and structural failures within the ATF. Yet it cleared Attorney General Eric Holder and top political leaders of criminal responsibility. In short, everything went wrong, but no one was truly held accountable. The report led to internal consequences at the ATF. 14 officials were disciplined or reassigned. None faced criminal charges. None went to court, let alone to prison. Despite the number of victims, the lost weapons, and the diplomatic damage caused, the system responded with bureaucracy, not justice. For many analysts, this was the real crime, that such a catastrophic, deadly operation ended without culprits. On Mexico's side, the story was even murkier. During Felipe Calderón's presidency, the government categorically denied any knowledge or participation in the operation. The same was said by Eduardo Medina Mora, then Attorney General. However, U.S. Congress documents showed otherwise. PGR Representative Carlos Fernando Luque Ordóñez had direct access to the ATF in Phoenix. He attended meetings and possibly approved the strategy. Once his name was revealed, he vanished from public view. Mexico never launched a high-level investigation, nor did it request the extradition of the U.S. officials involved. Even when civil organizations like Desarma Mexico filed criminal complaints against the Mexican state for allowing or covering up the operation, the cases were dismissed. Years later, during Andrés Manuel López Obrador's presidency, the case made headlines again. In a morning press conference, AMLO said bluntly, "We are facing a very delicate case. It is being acknowledged that there was an illegal intrusion that violated our sovereignty." His government demanded from the United States a formal explanation, the delivery of documents, and the names of those responsible. The Foreign Ministry sent a diplomatic note to Washington. To this day, no conclusive response has been received. Between 2009 and 2011, the operation allowed more than 2,500 weapons to cross illegally into Mexico. Less than half have been recovered. The rest are still out there, and these aren't ordinary handguns. They include assault rifles, light machine guns, .50 Barrett rifles, FN-57s, and military-grade weapons that today form part of the standard arsenal of Mexican cartels. These weapons have appeared in shootouts with Mexican military and police, massacres between cartels, assassinations of journalists, activists, and politicians. The criminal groups directly benefited by these weapons include Sinaloa Cartel, Los Zetas, Gulf Cartel, La Familia Michoacana, Milenio Cartel, and later the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG. These organizations used the weapons to expand their territory, increase their firepower, and consolidate their power. Operation Fast and Furious didn't weaken the cartels as intended. It strengthened them like never before. There is no exact number of victims killed by weapons from Fast and Furious. Analysts estimate we're talking about thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of people, and not just criminals killed in confrontations. We're talking about innocent civilians murdered in crossfire, journalists silenced, police executed, soldiers ambushed, families displaced, entire towns terrorized, and most alarming of all, many of those guns are still active, still firing, still killing. Many experts and former agents believe Fast and Furious was not an operational error, but part of a broader strategy. A growing hypothesis suggests the US government knew the guns would end up in cartel hands, but allowed it to happen to gain intelligence and exert political or geostrategic pressure. Whether true or not, one thing is undeniable: the operation failed in its stated goal, violated Mexican sovereignty, caused thousands of deaths, and ended with no real accountability. Operation Fast and Furious stands as one of the most blatant examples of the state negligence disguised as a strategy. It was a deadly experiment carried out by an agency of the world's most powerful government, one that played with fire and burned an entire nation. Its consequences remain alive in the cities where the cartels still rule, in the families who lost their children, in the weapons still used to kill, and in the impunity that still persists on both sides of the border. If this story shook you, you're not alone. We haven't forgotten either. At ENIGMAZE, we believe that telling these stories is an act of justice. Subscribe, turn on the bell, and share this documentary with someone who deserves to know the truth, because silence also kills, and impunity does it twice.